Okay. Hello, my name is Viviana, and today I'm going to talk about a horror book called Naomi's Room by Jonathan Alecliffe. Acliff. It's a short, 250-page book, a really creepy ghost story about whose family's life completely falls apart after their young daughter Naomi disappears. This book mixes real life grief with supernatural horror, and it just gets a lot more disturbing because it feels so personal and emotional more than that like type of jump scare, scary type of book. So here's the cover, and then this I want to start off with a moment in the book that really stuck with me whenever I was reading and trying to find a hook to put on here. But here, the narrator Charles is writing about what happened to his family years, not in this situation, but in the book. It's from Charles's point of view, and he's writing about what happened to his family after all that happened. And as he's writing, he can feel this sense of ghost that he feels as his daughter in the room with him. And obviously, whenever you feel something, you don't want to look. So this is exactly what he does. He refuses to look and turn around and look at her because he's terrified of what he's going to see. And I don't blame her because I wouldn't look either. And then that kind of quiet psychological horror is literally what this whole book feels like. When reading this, it's just like, what next is going to happen? And it's kind of like, I kind of like, it's not like an irky feeling, but it's just like, I'm scared for Charles because I don't know what's going to happen. Because in this book, the entire time you're in his head, and since he's kind of going sane at this point, insane, sorry. I don't know like if this whole time what he's experiencing is real or if it's just his grief and it's just getting to him at this point. Okay, so these are the characters from the book. We have Charles, which is Naomi's father, and this whole story is told from his point of view. He is a literature professor at Cambridge University. He's very academic, so that's why it kind of makes a little more terrifying that he's literally an academic like scholar, and it gets intense when he starts questioning his own sanity because it's just like, bro, like, you're smart, like, why are you thinking these things? And then we have Naomi, which is obviously his daughter, and she's dead from the start. She obviously never leaves the story. This whole book is about her. Her ghostly presence is everywhere in her room, in the house, and in Charles's memory. And then another important character is his wife, Laura, Charles's wife, who's a lot quieter in the book, but she's obviously very important. She represents the more emotional than physical emotion of grief. And then in this way, being able to see Laura's point of view, we could see how differently the two parents handle the same tragedy. And then the ghosts, they're not really that important. I have two other characters. I didn't put them on here because the ghosts were not taking up as much room in the Google Slides. So I'm just going to talk about them here. So, two other important characters is a reporter whose name is Lewis. And Lewis, his job is he takes photos around the house of Charles, and he goes around and he takes photos, and his photos capture ghost pictures. So if there's a ghost in the photo, the camera that he takes it on is able to depict what spiritually is there. So whenever Charles is feeling like eerie about something, he'll hire Lewis to come, and he'll have Lewis take photos of around the house to see if he's actually feeling what he's feeling and he's not actually in his head. And then there's also a detective named Ruthven. I'm pretty sure that's how you say his name. I don't know. His name's always been complicated. which is the cop that is handling Naomi's case. And both of them in the book, I don't want to spoil it, but they both get pulled into something, Lewis and Ruthven, they both get pulled into something way darker than just a missing child investigation. But I will not spoil that yet. So the setup and is that the story starts on Christmas Eve in 1970 in London, and it also depicts kind of in Cambridge. So it starts off with Charles and Naomi going Christmas Eve shopping, and Charles is taking Naomi shopping, and then they go to the Hamleys, which is like, it's like our Target. It's a huge, crowded, like, toy store. And then just for a little bit, Charles loses sight of Naomi, and that's all it takes, and she's gone. So they're at this one Hamley store. Charles loses sight of Naomi, and all of a sudden she's gone, and no one knows what happened to her. And at first, everyone thinks she might have just wandered off. Obviously, it's a toy store, like, maybe she just went to go look at toys, but no, as time passes, it becomes clear that obviously something worse has happened, because no one can find her. Charles can't find her. The workers can't find her. So then a few days later, Naomi's body is found in a different part of London. It kind of scares me to even think about. It's really disturbing and brutal. And from that point on, the family's life is literally like, it's on the teeter-totters, like, it's really shattered, like, it's messed up. And then what's really interesting in the book is that it tells you early on that she's dead. That we never know really what kind of happens to Naomi, but just that Charles feels this guilt because Naomi was with Charles when it happened, and Charles was not paying attention to her. So that's why Charles, throughout this whole book, he feels that sense of like, it was my fault, and he gets that guilt. So yeah, and then the police get involved from all this, but the real horror part of this book is just what happens after, which is kind of crazy. Okay, so after Naomi's death, Charles and Laura try to keep living in their house. They try to keep searching for Naomi and everything. But things just start happening mostly around Naomi's room. They hear a little girl laughing and singing when the house should be completely quiet. And I'm home alone, so I'm really scared on if, like, I just don't like talking about this. But anywho, yeah, they hear a little girl, and she's laughing and she's singing, and toys are found moved, things are knocked over, and a ball, and in one part of the book, a ball is heard bouncing down the stairs when no one's there. So the scary part is that at first they think it's just the grief messing with them, that they think they're just thinking about things that they shouldn't be thinking about, like they're hearing what they want to hear almost. But then it gets a lot more tense, and it starts feeling like something is trying to get their attention, and obviously not in a nice way. So, yeah, that's the part that I'm getting uneasy about right now. Okay, but here's some themes throughout this whole thing. It's not just the parents who experience things. So I'm going to go through all these themes. So, let me actually go back to this slide. Okay. Sorry. It's not just also the parents who are experiencing something. Lewis, the journalist, I remember I mentioned him earlier. He starts experiencing things when he takes photos during the investigation. When he develops the photos through like those little like old cameras, he notices figures in the background. And people who just obviously were not there at the time and were just there spiritually. And it's not just Naomi. like obviously it's Naomi, but it's also other things. Like sometimes it's attached to the places where the crimes happened. So then this is when they bring in Detective Ruthven, the cop, and um, Ruthven is actually later found dead in a really disturbing way, which I'm really not going to explain. And it connects back to the same evil behind Naomi's murder. So Charles starts researching the history of their house. Then this is when the researcher helps him, and they just start looking around the surrounding areas of the house as well. So he goes into old records and newspapers, archives, and realizes that there have been other violent deaths and disappearances connected to this place. So the story shifts from just being a ghost story about one child who went missing at a toy store to something a lot bigger. Like this long chain of evil that's been going on for years, like any other horror story would. It's kind of giving like Insidious. If you've ever watched Insidious, I don't know if you have. Okay. Oh, what was that? Okay. So the themes in this is what makes Naomi's room really hit emotionally. Is that it's not just about the ghosts, obviously. It's about the grief and the trauma that's connected to this house. And the more attention that Charles and the detectives give to the ghosts is the more it happens in their house. So Charles is constantly replaying the day in his head of going to the toy store at Hamley's, blaming himself because he let go of Naomi's hand just for a few seconds, and the guilt throughout just the whole story, just it never goes away. So the house, which should be obviously a safe place for everyone, becomes the center of the whole horror part. The idea of your own home turning against you is obviously terrifying. So, yeah, like, if it was my house, I would be like, I don't know what to do. So, the book also suggests that the evil doesn't disappear. It obviously gets passed down, repeated, and connected to the same locations and families over time. So, Secrets of the Past. And I'm not going to spoil the ending, but let's just say Charles discovers some really disturbing truths about why his family was targeted and how deep this evil really goes. So, even though the book is written as a horror story, I kind of already talked about this. The Charles uncovers horrifying truths about Naomi's disappearance, blah, blah, blah. Okay, even though this book is written as a horror story, I connected with it mainly through the emotional side. It reminded me a lot of the hauntings of the Hill House, where the ghosts are connected to the trauma in the family history. And it also reminded me of the Babadook, which usually uses a monster as a symbol of grief and depression. So I don't personally relate to losing a child, obviously, but I do relate to the idea of not being able to let go of something painful and how that can affect your mental health, obviously. So everyone has their moments where they replay a mistake over and over in their head, thinking, if I had done this differently, blah, 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 maybe this wouldn't have happened. And that's kind of what happens to Charles constantly. And that felt very human to me, even underneath all the horror, obviously. So in terms of difficulty, I'd say this book is a medium. The sentences are a little bit formal because Charles is a professor at Cambridge, a literature professor at that. But once you get used to his voice, it's not really that hard to follow. The story is told kind of a memoir from Charles, and many years after everything happened. So you're always aware that he's looking back, and obviously something's being foreshadowed from his own mistakes and trauma. But Allie Cliff uses a slow burn style of horror. The really scary moments usually come after long stretches of tension, small hints, like I said, foreshadowing, and unsettling details. And I also noticed how the author plays with time. So Allie Cliff, sometimes the house seems to bend time a little. Charles sometimes feels like he's literally seeing into the past. That makes it feel like history is bleeding into the present. Going into the part where it talks about the history of the house being haunted, which fits the theme of the old evil kind of never dying. But overall, the writing was very atmospheric. It relied more on what you imagine than when you could physically see described, which made it creepier for me. But some recommendation and final thoughts. I would recommend Naomi's Room to people who like horror that gets in your head instead of just relying on gore or jump scares. If you enjoy ghost stories that are also emotional, where the character feels real and broken, I would also say to read this book. But you'd probably really get into this. I wouldn't recommend it to someone who hates sad or dark stories that affect your mental health, because this book does not give you a happy, comforting feeling. It's a heavy, especially because it involves a child, and the way the child dies, obviously, is not the best. My overall impression is that it's a really effective horror novel. The haunting, the family's grief, and the way everything connects at the end stuck with me even after one finished reading. It feels like just less than a spooky book and more like a messed up tragic family horror that happens to involve ghosts. And that's what made it memorable for me. But thanks for listening and thanks for joining.